Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Welcome, friends, to the next chapter with Charlie. As usual, we're so pleased to have you with us. Our special guest today is Brian Herriot, author, speaker, financial advisor, and entrepreneur coach. Brian's mission, now check this out, this is cool. Brian's mission is to guide others to work on what they want, when they want, for as long as they want. And he teaches us to live out our eulogy now. Make our eulogy a reality now, so it's not something that's contrived when we die. I think it's very cool. So let's get on the road and get the show on. Yo, Brian Herriot, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie, for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I have so much I want to talk about today, but why don't we just start with what I was just raving about, and let's start out with, you told me that you want to help people live out our desired eulogy today. Tell me what that's all about.
This was something that I learned in a book by David Brooks. Actually, the title of the book escapes me, but the concept has stuck with me for years, and that is, when you attend someone's funeral and you hear what the attendees talk about the person, they don't talk about the level they achieved in their corporate career or anything like that. They talk about the family man that he was, or the helpful, kind and kind individual that the person was. And it's these series of kind of eulogy characteristics that ultimately define who you are as a person. But we don't really, they kind of exist in the background, but meanwhile, we're looking at all these like resume kind of characteristics that we want in our lives. That message just really resonated with me, and into how can you take those, eulogy characteristics and bring them earlier in your life and have those be the focus of your life, because that's what you're remembered for anyway. And that's what, people on their deathbed look back at those as the important things in life.
Yeah, that's incredible. You talk about when you just mentioned resumes, it reminded me, one of the things you talk about is one of our ideals in life is to build our character, not our resume. And especially, when you're in your 30s and 40s, especially in your 30s and 40s, and then in your 50s, we're trying to build resumes. And, that's helpful. That helps you get a job. But that's not what people are going to know you for. They're not going to know you for your resumes. They're going to know you for your character and the way you treat people. How do you have any personal definitions or ideas about character over resume?
I think, one thing I want to make sure I make clear is like the fact that because we're pursuing these career building things, it's not a bad thing. And it's not anything that we're not told to do, right? I think as you are earlier in your career, in your profession, you want to, develop yourself, and the way to do that is to work hard and, deliver on what you say you're going to deliver. But then, like you mentioned, kind of as you hit midlife, there's this point where you start to question some of that. Actually, in some of my research for a book I'm working on, I learned about this research study that was done. It was like 500,000 people. They assessed like the happiness levels of individuals kind of over the course of their life, and it formed what looks like a smile. So people are, quite happy in their 20s coming out of school, and then it starts to dip, and in their 40s and 50s, it's lower. But then eventually, it's not all bad, because eventually it comes back up, and by your 60s and your 70s, you're happy again. And my take on that is that, when you're in the middle of life, you hit this like switch over where you start realizing that it's not just about what you're working on, but like why you're working on it. And it has to do with like not what you're accomplishing in your resume, but like why you're doing it. Like what, are you making an impact? Are you doing it in the right way? And I feel like, I went through that. I think a lot of people go through that. But you should take that kind of moment of transition and just roll with it and lean into it. And the sooner that you kind of recognize that this is happening and try to make a fix, you can kind of recover that smile a little bit faster, and and get to the point where you're coming out the other side, working on the things that you want to work on. And maybe it's not that you want to work the 80 hours a week anymore to accomplish that big thing, but you realize that, you could actually make more of an impact to the people that are closest to you if you work 30 hours a week, or you work, full time, but maybe you take some time off in the year. And, money is certainly a big question that comes into play in terms of how you make something like this work. But if you get to that point, you need the money, you need the time, but then with that, then you can really truly live these eulogy type values.
Is this what you call your what, why, smile curve?
That is, yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to. It's like at the bottom point of that smile, when the studies are showing us that we're least happy, we're figuring things out. And I think you flip over from talking about or thinking about what you're working on to why you're working on it. And then once you figure that out, you can start to recraft the work that you do to be in line with who you are and what you stand for and what impact you want to make. And then you start to recover up the other side of the curve.
I read some years ago when Andy Grove was CEO of Intel, and he started a process with his people that weekly he wanted everybody in the corporation, and I don't know how many hundreds or thousands there were at that time, but including himself, he said, I would like everyone in the company to write a few just bullet points on what value did you add last week. Mm-hmm. He said, I don't care what you did. Don't tell me these were my activities. Activities don't mean anything. But what did you bring of value to the company? And isn't that right in line with what you're talking about?
Exactly. It's not just a list of accomplishments. It's like, what did you do to make a change? And actually, I think part of the interesting part about that question is that you're kind of defining what the value is, right? Like you get a chance to determine what that value is that you're bringing. It's a wonderful thing.
Brilliant, and that shows how brilliant Andy Grove was because that's what he talked about. He said, it's not how did you contribute to our mission, how did you embrace and live out our values. He just said, what did you do? And it's sort of, what did you feel you did that made a difference in the company? And it made a difference in your contribution.
Yeah.
I do a process that's called, I don't do it now, but I created a process. It was called Performance Acceleration for New Hires. Mm-hmm. And it was a process that a Harvard Business Review study indicated it takes 6 months for a manager to break even on what is invested in the manager and what the manager brings to the company. because so much of it is they in the first 6 months or the first several months, they're consuming value. And then after they begin to produce, they start adding value. And so what is the break even? And he said the break even, or HBR indicated at that time that the break even was 6 months. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this program that said that would try to say, my idea was, what if we could take, that 3 months of consuming value to 1 month of consuming value? How do you with new hires, how do you add value with only a month? And so, it did really well. I probably could have retired on it, but I get bored too quickly. And after it, it was, I sold it to a couple of very large companies for like stupid money. And I could have sold it to more, but I got bored and went to something else.
I could have used it. I just, sorry to interject, but what you say really resonates because I spent so much of my life in consulting. And the lesson I learned from a young age about consulting is that you basically have about 2 weeks. Like when you roll into a new company and you're ready to help them out, you have kind of 2 weeks to get up to speed, get the questions asked, understand how things are working, and then you need to start adding value at that point. And I can remember specifically, it was an occasion I had at Genentech where I was consulting.
Oh, really?
And right about the 2 week, 2 day mark, my client was, I could see she was like itching for like, where's that first deliverable? And I'm like, wow, this is really true. This is exactly true. And I quickly fortunately I was trained well, and I brought the deliverable out. She's like, yes, this is what I'm looking for. And so like that concept of getting up to speed quickly so resonates with me.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the identifying pieces that I put in there where, we would do job description, what you do and who you report to. But I had hiring bosses put into the job description, what value does this position bring to the company? And that's rarely in job descriptions.
Yeah.
That is true. But when someone knows this is the value that is anticipated and what's expected, and then we always, encourage people to say, you bring your own value. What do you bring? I had other questions. What do you bring that's not on your resume, that didn't come out in the interview? What sort of efforts do you do? What sort of resources do you have personally that will impact the company? And it just, it was hugely, it was really important. I would just tell you, I was checking up baseball scores just now. My son plays baseball, and
Did he get a hit?
What's that?
Did he get a hit?
No. You didn't read any of the articles on him, right?
No, I didn't. I just knew
there's an article. There's two big articles. One was in the New York Times. He had the whole, for Cleveland, he had the whole front page of the sports page on him. Why is a 186 hitter so irresistible, and why does everybody love Austin Hedges? And it's very interesting. But I was talking to the manager. The manager is Stephen Vogt, and last year he was a first-year manager with Cleveland. He was in the big leagues with only 1 year off, and he was he was a bullpen coach. He stopped the big leagues after 15 years or so as a catcher, and then he had 1 year as a bullpen coach, and then he was given, he was offered this job for like untold money, and he And he won last year. He won Manager of the Year for the American League as a first-year manager.
Wow.
So he and I got chatting about that. Fortunately, he gave me, to get any time with a manager when you're just a dad, you don't get any time. But Stephen Vogt is his name, and we call him Voter. Voter loves Austin so much that he gave his dad a chance, and we talked, and fortunately we synced and we engaged. And I was asking him, what is the difference maker? What makes, how do you win Manager of the Year? What makes the difference? And he said, one thing. There is one thing that I believe if you don't bring to the table, you're not going to be successful. And it's everything to do with people. That's his management style, is people. People, my players, the whole staff, the office, the training, the gym, the gym people, mental coaches. Everybody needs to know that I care about them, the organization cares about them, and they are important and they're highly valued. And, Cleveland was 3 games from the World Series last year with nobody other than Jose Ramirez. They were nobody. Man. They were just a bunch of minor league guys that had come up, but they all believe. And I like that. What do you think about that? That kind of hits the eulogy thing we were talking about earlier. Yeah, what do you think about that people aspect?
What I thought of was that's why Ted Lasso was such a good show. Because
exactly.
Yeah, because of he was 100% committed to supporting each of those players in such a wonderful, positive way. And it's a great story, but I think that it makes me happy that so many people liked it, which means that people actually appreciate that, right? And, despite all the crazy stuff going on in the world, people like personal connection. It's very important to them in whatever it is, profession, personal, whatever.
And, that's just not common. He and I were talking, he knows little about business, but I was bringing business concepts into it and said, people in management today still use that archaic military form of management where it's a list of actions and do this, do that, and you're rewarded for your accomplishments and you're punished, as it were, if you don't do certain activities without really caring. You didn't perform on this project, and instead of just coming and deriding the person for not performing, you said, it's better to say, what happened? What went on with you that prevented you from growing? Now, and if it was just negligent behavior, that's dealt with. That's not saying there's not such a thing as inadequate behavior, but it begins with, okay, we care about you, what's going on, and now you've got to care about other people.
I think that's a great message.
I'm gonna circle back. Believe it or not, I know you may be a little weary of it already, but I want to circle back to the eulogy, because not so much the eulogy, but you talk about getting people ready for retirement, and I think that you are really onto something. As a retired man, now that I'm 75 and I'm hit even greater aspects of retirement where productivity is no longer important. I work with nonprofits and I don't care about what I produce for them. That's not of value to me. There are other things that are of value to me. And I believe this, that when you're 30, 40, and 50, especially when you're hitting the 50s and 60s as you're nearing retirement, you say, it's almost the when I get, it's the when I get mentality. And that all of a sudden, when I get retired, then I'm going to take it easy, forget work. I'm going to do my travel, do my vacations, do that. I'm going to relax. But they can't, Brian, because they have no history of it. They have no experience. And I think what you're preaching is form and develop the habits you will need for retirement. Form those habits now.
Yes, I've always been fascinated with the concepts of, doing what you want when you want for how long you want, right? A life of choice, flexibility, ease. And it kind of came about and through financial freedom, right? So financial freedom I wanted. You can get it in retirement. You can get it earlier. I was trying to get it as early as possible so that I didn't just have to work. And I did everything you're supposed to do, right? I saved in my 401k. I did everything. I did all of that all the way through my 40s and got to this stage. This was in about January of 2020, actually, where, I looked at our account balances finally, and it kind of looked like it was close, right? Like I could possibly do it. And then the COVID crash hit. And I've learned all the rules of how to invest. And the number one is, don't sell in a panic. But I would wake up every single night in February and March of 2020 and look at my numbers at the dining room table while my family was sleeping upstairs going, oh my gosh, there goes another 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. And I thought, man, I was doing all this right. And now I'm right back to where I started. And I got very discouraged by the financial freedom piece of it until I realized what is it that I really wanted? It wasn't the money. It was what the money could get me. Like you're talking about, like what I wanted was the freedom of the time to do the things that I wanted. And I was thinking that I needed to have this mountain of money in order to get there. Well, I no longer had the mountain of money. And so I started to think about what else could I do to get this freedom. And I realized that I was actually I had the golden ticket, and the golden ticket was this very micro-sized small business that I owned, which I call a lifestyle business, which was this very small consulting firm that allowed me to protect the time that I wanted and still make the money that I needed to make, but really pull forward the whole experience of having that personal time freedom that I was looking for without having to be 100% free. And to your point, what I realized one summer when I wasn't working, by the end of the summer, I really wanted to get back to work because I felt like, I was missing out. And so I kind of learned this lesson that I'm so glad that I didn't kill myself to reach all this money to never work again, only then to realize that I did want to work again. So I've come to this new realization in my life that I think the right level of work is great. I think you need to get to this point where you create this work that you love and that you enjoy doing. And then if you also can create it in such a way that allows for flexibility to come out of the work when you need to and come back into the work, then you kind of have the best of both worlds. You can experience the time freedom early, and you can keep making money, and you don't have to, worry about the markets and all of those sorts of things. And it was kind of a revelatory experience for me that summer of 2023 when I figured this out, that there's just a slightly different way that you can kind of put these puzzle pieces of life together to live this more free life earlier, knowing that you're still going to have to work, but just in the right way.
You know, that is so similar to what we were talking about earlier, and that is practicing for retirement now.
Yeah.
You know, getting the habit of it. So when you do hit retirement, this is not something totally new, obscure, abstract. You know, when I retired, officially retired, and then now I'm much more into retirement. Mm-hmm. But when I officially retired, you know, I was a rather productive human being, not just in business, but in personal life. I was a baseball coach. I did things with my church. I did things. So I was always kind of the doer that got things done. And then I retired. I was no longer working. And I had two haunting realities. And that is boredom, an empty calendar, and a feeling of uselessness. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how to find value apart from productivity, and there is a place. It may sound like they don't work together, but you can work without productivity. You can work, you can add value, you can do good things without really being productive. And that's a whole different mindset. And it seems like you're catching that at a very young age.
Yeah, and I'm only applying what I've looked and seen, you know, from members of my own family. So my grandfather owned a plumbing and heating business in a small rural town in Wisconsin. And, you know, eventually that work gets to you and you have to retire. But I think more than the plumbing, he loved chatting with the customers, right? So into his 70s, he went and took a job at the Ace Hardware. And, you know, he knew more about all the plumbing fixtures and stuff for sale in that store than anybody. And he was the nicest, kindest person. He was like employee of the year. And he worked that as long as he possibly could. People like get so many things out of work. You know, my mother, she's 70 years old. She thinks she's younger, but, you know, she's 70. She's an independent real estate agent.
Sounds like she's a young 70. Young 70 years old. So
young 70. And she's like, when should I retire? You know, when should I stop selling houses? I'm like, you should never retire, because she loves the interaction of the people and doing the deals. And, you know, again, in a small town in Wisconsin, I think once you give that up, you kind of put that away and then you wonder what to do, you know, with your life. And so I think that I'm definitely into, like you said, like practicing retirement is like kind of pulling back a little bit and seeing what happens and seeing what you learn instead of like cutting it off completely, right? Because then you either have to somehow work your way back in, or I don't know. I just think it's a much bigger struggle. And to the extent that you can find a career that allows for things like that, like so many careers would allow you to kind of pull back and do it on a part-time basis or a partial year basis, or apply what you learned in your larger career as a coach, you know, or whatever. There's just so many more options for doing that today. And then it's like, why? Well, you don't have to wait till you're 65 to do it. Why don't you do it when you're 45, you know, and then you can get those benefits even earlier in life. That's my mantra anyway.
I love it. This is what you call your words that you've written about are early time freedom,
yeah,
and seasonal time splitting. Now, you know, you have this cabin in Wisconsin, and you're sort of a summer polar bear.
That's right.
Exactly. And then you go and retreat for the whole summer, for the entire. I think that is brilliant. That is so cool. Tell us about that.
Well, since I was a my grandparents had a cabin on a lake in northern Wisconsin, and I was going up there since I was 1 year old. And it's like ingrained in me. When I was in college, they complained that nobody came anymore and they sold the place. But fortunately, I had just met my wife, who also lived on a lake up in northern Wisconsin. So I was able to move lakes. So lakes have been part of my life for so long. And we knew from a very young age, even when we got together, that we wanted a cabin in Wisconsin. And we wanted to spend our summers there. But we're also not teachers or professors or any of the other very few careers that have summers off. But it had always been our mission to figure out a way to spend summers in Wisconsin and actually it really was the COVID pandemic that allowed this all to happen, because my work went remote. They didn't care where you worked from. And so we worked from there in the summer. Eventually, I didn't have to work anymore in the summer. And I do that through what I call seasonal time splitting, which is just taking, some of the old working models from the distant past, like, hunting and gathering and farming and all of, before the Industrial Revolution, where work did depend upon the seasons, and trying to say, hey, why is it only teachers that live this way? Does it really have to be that? And realizing that, no, not at all. You just, instead of, having kind of your work and your team define how you use your time, if you can set your time as your goal, and then you can define your work and your team around how that'll work with your time. So what I try to do is structure my, the services that I provide as a financial advisor, and investment advisor in such a way where I'm, doing my detailed plans with people during the months when I want to work. And then during the summer, I can do investment and management. That's not a time consuming thing, but I can do that and then pull back on the other kind of more intense individual planning that has to happen during the time of year that's not the summer. I think that so many careers, if you're your own boss, typically, can be organized, and jobs can be organized in such a way that you can really create seasonality in your work. Make it happen, force it to happen so that you can kind of come out of the business at the right times. And the thing is, like, especially for entrepreneurs, when you're, even myself, in the summer, I'm not just completely thinking about nothing. Like, we are always thinking about our business, but you're not in the details of it. So you can actually think of bigger, better ways to do things. And so what's happening, instead of financial freedom driving your time freedom, now your time freedom is driving your financial freedom. And so it's kind of a backwards way of looking at life, but a way to accelerate doing what you want to do, not having to defer your happiness or the things that are important to you. And, in my particular case, it is that summertime on a lake, water skiing behind a boat. That's all I want to do. And now I can do it, and I don't have to be 65 to do it all summer. I can do it at 45,
That's all I can say is in the African American church, all I can say is preach it, brother.
Well, I get really passionate about it because I feel like it's very possible for people. It is not possible for everyone, and I don't want to skip past the fact that there's a lot of things that have worked out for me in my life that allow me to do that. But with some shifting of things, I've found that for middle career people that have done some saving because they were taught from a young age that you should, maybe you're not near retirement amount of savings, but with some adjustments, you can create a different life for yourself, a better life for yourself.
When my wife and I had a child. We have only an only child. We had Austin I was older. I was 42 years old. Mm-hmm. And so, there's something beautiful about being an older parent because you're more settled. I'm a much different parent at 42 than I am at 25. It doesn't mean I'm a better parent. It just means I'm a different parent. And so I was a consultant at the time, and I was doing a handful of international work where I'd spend at least a week a month. This was a time I'm thinking I would spend at least a week a month, sometimes more, in Canada. I worked in the oil industry. I would be in Calgary and Edmonton, which are, high oil producing areas, and Newfoundland. And I enjoyed it. I loved Canada. I loved working with the people in Canada. But I realized my son was about 7 years old at the time, and I realized I'm spending too much time away from my son. And so I am going to change my job, change my venue, change my opportunities, and say, I'm not going to travel. I'm just going to work in Southern California. And it occurred to me, in LA and Orange County, there were about 20 million people. And I'm thinking as a consultant, if I can't find work with 20 million people, then I need to find another career. And so I did that change. And then I did an even greater change is when we got into baseball. I had the kind of job, I'm fortunate. Now I want to talk to you about finances in a bit too, about financial planning. Mm-hmm. And I was in a kind of job that, I certainly was not wealthy, but I made a bit of money, and I was an executive coach to CEOs of billion-dollar companies, and so I was compensated really nicely, and so I made a decision to cut my work from 40 and 50 hours a week to where I'm not going to work more than 25 hours a week. That's it. I work 24 hours a week so I can spend 20 hours a week with my son, coaching baseball. And do you know what that has done, bro? My relationship with my son right now is just, we tell the story. I'll tell this funny story, and then I want to get with you. This funny story, Austin was he wasn't 7, he was maybe like 5 or so, and I officed out of my house. I didn't have it. I had a home office. And so I took him to daycare, and there was a lake on the way, and in the summer months we'd go in the lake and we'd swim before and do all that. So we said, and my wife is a very successful career consultant and now is an executive coach. I said, so Sonny, what do dads do? He says, well, dads take kids to school, they do the cooking. I loved gourmet cooking. It wasn't that I had to do the cooking, it's just that I loved cooking. And I would end up doing laundry and because I'm home and, and I'm still working, I'm still accomplishing what I need to accomplish. He said, so dads take kids to school, they do the cooking, all that. Well, what do moms do? They work. And it's not that his mom was a worker who didn't take care of him. His mom is an incredible mom. He talks about her today, and every show he does, he talks about how wonderful she is. But that was the way my son perceived our career. And I like that.
I love it. The kids are awesome that way. My son is 13 now. But I think you think you know stuff and you think you know how to do it right. And then they come back with something like, you mentioned the financial money stuff. I was all into, teaching my son how to save and budget and all those things when you're young. Oh. They have there's this thing, I'm sure they probably had a version of this forever, but the 3-jar method. So when your kid gets like $30 for a birthday present that they're supposed to put $10 in the spending jar, $10 in the saving jar, and $10 in the charity jar.
Oh,
and you're
really?
supposed to, so that works. And in theory and on the podcast that you listen to, that just taught everybody's kid to do that. Well, that was not my case.
Oh, I was going to say congratulations. I never heard that.
Work.
That is,
he took it all out and spent it all.
yeah, my son still does.
What are you going to do? He's like, well, I'll just go make more. I'll make more money. And so I've thought long and hard about that. Like, what does that mean for him and his future? And I've actually come kind of full circle or 180 on the whole thing, where I used to think, if you didn't save, it was not good. Right now, I still believe people should save, but I don't think it's the only solution. He knowing him, he will have the ability to make money in a moment's notice. Like, he is the consummate salesman, even at a very, very young age. I'll give you a very quick story. He was 7. He was just going into 2nd grade. We had a garage sale at our house, first one ever. And he heard us, we set this goal of like $700. And he's like, well, if I can sell more, can I make the extra money on top of the 700 if you hit 700? And I'm like, I thought about it and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And good thing, because halfway through the garage sale, I kind of lost sight of him until I heard this, our car fob beep, beep kind of situation. And I look over and he is like showing our car to this woman who was at the garage sale. Like he was opened the doors, showed her the blinkers, all this kind of, he's 7 years old and he loves cars. So he knew everything. And then he brought her back to me, as he had overheard that we were going to be selling our car. And so he was selling our car at the garage sale. And the lady actually bought the thing. And he sold our car for $7,000 as a 7-year-old. And I'm so glad that I didn't offer him all the money above $700 because I owe him a lot of money, but he still thinks he gets his commission off that. So the kid is amazing in that regard. And I'm like, maybe it's more freeing from a financial standpoint to be able to just make money on a moment's notice if you need to, and having the skills to do that than, perhaps having it saved and risked loss from a big stock market crash or something like that. But I'm like, yeah, that kid, he's something else.
We have such similar values and similar experiences. My son is exactly the same way. He does, he looks at the future and he just doesn't care about money. Now, he tries to make as much money as he can right now, and he makes a good salary. Mm-hmm. And he tries to make as much money as he can, but he's not going to take a job for money. Like when he goes into managing baseball, the manager makes a lot more money, but he wants to be a bench coach, which is about 20% of what a manager makes. Mm-hmm. And I told him, well, what about, and he says, Dad, you need to understand, I don't care about money. I just don't care, because I always, just like your son said, I always know I can make more. I can, I started with nothing, I can start with nothing again and build myself up. And I don't need a lot of money. I don't spend a lot of money. He spends money on fine food. That's what his financial advisors say. You need to cut down on food because he loves fine restaurants. But that's it. And so that's so fun to hear you say that, because I can't fathom a financial advisor supporting that. And
yeah, I'm a little bit backward. And I think it's because I came into financial advising later in life, where, I have a different perspective on it. Again, I am a saver. I advocate savings and investments can provide you such a security blanket. And, if something happens, so I'm definitely not against it. But I believe that people have their own money personalities that were forged in how they were raised or experiences that they came across. And whereas another financial advisor may say that, that situation, like I'm going to go make more is not a good thing. Like you need to save. I don't necessarily agree with that. Like I feel like if that's your approach, like you should save a little just in case you need it. And eventually you'll not be able to work. And so we'll have to work that stuff out. But if you don't want to put, multi-million dollars in savings, you want to do it differently, that's okay. I think that would be a lot. If more people believed that about themselves, people would feel a lot better about themselves. That's for sure. Because you hear about all the statistics about people that haven't saved enough for retirement. But yeah, I mean, I happen to like work. I like the work I like, and I want to keep doing it forever. It's mentally stimulating for me. It's great for my social, interactions. I love it. And I don't think I'm not on this big, I'm not on the early retirement bandwagon it anymore like I used to be, because I realize that there's some really wonderful things that can happen because of work. I'm almost on like a never retire scenario. I mean, I don't think I'm going to work intensely for the rest of my life, but some of the most successful people are people that love what they do. And if you love what you do, you maybe don't even look at it as work anymore.
My wife is exactly like that. She's younger than me, but not that much younger than me. And so we talk about, so honey, when do you think you're going to, as a coach and a trainer and working with high level executives, and she's got a group of women that are all either C-suite or right below C-suite that it's a group that meets 6 times a year, meets every other month, and they get together and support each other, and they love each other because it's very relational, and they're from non-competing industries, so they can talk about their jobs and they can talk about life. And I said, so when do you think you're going to call it quits? She goes, I haven't arrived. I don't know. I like what I'm doing, and I'm just going to continue to do it until I don't like it anymore.
Yeah.
Until it doesn't work.
Yeah. 6 times she's got work that she's doing in between that, but 6 times a year, I would do that forever as well.
Oh, that's like a side income. I mean, she does like stupid well. I tell people, not only am I a kept man, I'm a well-kept man.
So, nice.
So it's really nice. And, now the one thing that we must say, that I'm sure you will agree with, and you've already mentioned the word, with some kind of savings, some kind of money that you can dip into and that you can support yourself, there is enormous security in that. There is, and we're savers, and we're at it. See, we happen to be at a place in life where we can save a lot because we earn a lot. Mm-hmm. So we still can live the kind of life we want to live, and we can save a lot, and we can give a lot because we're very philanthropic. And it really works. How do you I can hear financial advisors listening to you go, oh my God, this guy is crazy, yet, you're singing my tune. I'm loving what you're saying. What kind of responses are you getting from your clientele?
Well, interestingly, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs tend to be underserved, I think, by financial advisors because the money that they have is going into their business, right? Their investment is in in themselves, basically in their business. It's not necessarily sitting in a 401k or an IRA or whatever the vehicle of choice happens to be. And I work with a lot of those people because I respect that. And if you run your business well, that's a much higher performing investment asset than even a stock is that you can just buy. So I'm a unique crossover financial advisor, but entrepreneurship coach. And I think that's rare. And so wherever those individuals happen to be, I can help them. And so in that regard, I don't have to rely on only working with the person who has a $2 million portfolio. And I like that because a lot of them don't have that. And because of that, maybe it's, a quarter of that, but they'd still appreciate some assistance that some advisors won't touch them because it's just not enough. And so I'm able to work with somebody like that, which is really rewarding for me. Also because it looks at your whole financial picture. It's not just that one component, just your investments or just your business. It's like the whole. It's how everything fits together. And it's the only way that I was able to solve my time freedom problem, by looking at everything together. And that's something that I learned in life, that those people those kind of holistic views on your financial life it's rare to find that. And eventually I decided that when I wanted to move into this business, that I would provide that holistic view, because it's what I wished that I had. And it makes me feel good about that. So again, like I'm doing the work that I want to do, the work that has impact and is meaningful for me, kind of coming full circle with, where we started. And, maybe it's not the most well paid, whatever. I'm helping the people that I want to help, and it's great. So I'm happy doing it.
That is so cool. Thank you. As we're nearing our time ending, I would like to devote it to, I'm going to kind of like switch subject just a little bit. Not switch subjects, but an approach a little bit. And when you wrote about seasonal time splitting, and you and I talked about seasons of life, I've been a big believer in seasons of life. And that I'll tell you my model, and then I would love for you to comment on it. Yeah. My model is life begins at 20 years old. And at 20 years old, you hit spring. And spring is a time for planting seeds, for developing, experimenting, taking chances, but just trying to learn something and figure out who you are. And as that's growing, and then you move into your summer, and you sort of have an idea of who you are. It doesn't mean specific career. It means that you have the wherewithal to understand who you are as a person, what you bring to the table, what you want to take from the table, and how you want to do that. And so that summer, and that summer goes, I say spring lasts from, say, 20 to 30 or 35. Summer lasts from 35 to 55 to 65. And then you hit what to me is the most beautiful season, and that is autumn. That's when things slow down, things cool off, things are their most beautiful. The East Coast and Wisconsin in spring are just magnificent. They're beautiful, and it's a time for truly treasuring the beauty of life. And so you're slowing down to some things that you treasure. And then when you hit winter, which is like over, somebody and I were talking about 80 years old being, hitting winter, and things, you just slow down. You're not capable of doing things. So life is different. But I love right now, I'm in the autumn. I've always looked forward to the autumn, and I wanted to treasure the autumn. How do those seasons, or do they even work with your philosophy?
I love your analogy, and here's how I would live it. Well, for one, if I could redo my spring, I would, because I just started right away, heads down in the work. I wish I would have done the 2-year thing around Europe and those experiences. So I didn't live it well looking back, but I love what you describe as what I wish I would have done. I think it goes to 35-ish, just like you said. But then I would live a summer, fall, like both of them, from 35 to 85 or 90.
That's brilliant.
I would do both at once because you know me, I love summer. Summer is my thing. And I want to start summer as soon as possible, and I want it to last as long as possible. But I also like the wisdom and the piece about the fall. I love that. I hadn't thought of that before, but I'd like to kind of live it as early as possible because that's also a wonderful time. So that's why I would kind of do like a summer, fall for all the way till. Actually, I'd probably try to do it forever. I know I can't do it forever, but there's a reason why I moved out of Wisconsin, is I hate winter. I just don't like winter. And so I'd prefer to just skip winter. Ideally, if I had to pick like how I was going to pass, it would be just very quickly right at the end. I wouldn't have to slow down too much and have any winter, but that's probably not going to be the way it is. But in an ideal world, that would be a wonderful way to have it happen, just to have that true longevity, and then just close it off real quick at the end. But I like that analogy.
I have talked about that model for probably 2 decades. And it's not a big deal that I tell her, but I
love it.
It's stayed with me for a while, and I've told it to people. No one ever has talked about why can't we live a summer, fall. And I think that's brilliant, Brian.
I want to bring fall early, and I want to extend summer as long as possible. So let's do it together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That is, let's wrap up with that, because I think that's just what you were advocating. What we've been talking about is this hybrid of summer and fall. And that's what you're teaching people, is a summer, fall.
I'm thinking about that season, both of them, and what a nice thought. What a nice way to end.
Well, what a great conversation. Brian Herriot, you are such a delight to chat with. You're one of those people that if we lived closer together, there's no doubt we would be friends.
Certainly.
We would hang out and chat about life, the universe, and everything. So thank you for spending time with me today.
Thanks, Charlie.
Okay. Also, I want to thank everybody for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.